I'm Lena Fan, 26, the quiet cousin everyone thought would never leave the neighborhood. The banquet hall was filled with gold, glitter, and glassware shimmering under artificial chandeliers that buzzed just a little too loud. I stood at the back of my cousin Anthony's engagement party, pressed against the wall near the dessert table, where a tray of half-melted mango mousse tilted precariously. I wasn't on the seating chart. Again. The tables were round, covered in white satin, and each place setting had little name cards, some hand-lettered in cursive, others clearly last-minute add-ons. Mine wasn't there. Not next to my brother. Not near Aunt Linda. Nowhere. A staff member in a bow tie finally came up to me. "Hi, miss. Are you part of the fan party?" I nodded. He looked at the tablet in his hand, flicked through some names, and pursed his lips. "Sorry. We only have 30 confirmed guests under that name. You might want to check with the family lead." The family lead was my uncle, the one who laughed loudest the day I announced I was applying for an overseas scholarship. He told everyone I'd come back pregnant or bankrupt. Probably both. Now he was seated at the center of the main table, clinking glasses with the groom-to-be, wearing a crisp blue suit too tight at the belly. I spotted my aunt leaning in, whispering something to Anthony's fiancé while glancing my way. The girl gave me the polite once-over, not dressed up enough, not important enough. I adjusted the sleeve of my black blazer. It was tailored in Zurich, wool, silk lining, simple. But here, I just looked underdressed, or overdressed, or invisible. I wasn't here to steal attention. I wasn't even sure why I came. I hadn't RSVP'd, I just showed up. The way you do when you're still half-tethered to a family that only remembers you when they need tech support or translations. Then I heard someone call my name mispronounced. Of course. Lena. A shaky voice. It was Grandma. She was sitting in the far corner, next to the gift table, wearing the same blue dye she wore to every celebration. Her hands trembled around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "Lena, come sit with me. They said I was just a placeholder too." I took the chair next to her and smiled. At least someone remembered. Grandma reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "They told me not to give this until later, but I'm tired of secrets." Inside was a check, not from her, from me, dated 3 weeks ago, for the amount of their mortgage. "Why is this?" I started. But before she could answer, the microphone at the front squealed. Everyone turned to the stage. Anthony was up there now, beaming in his champagne-colored suit. "We just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone here tonight," he said. "And especially, we want to thank our family for their love, their support, and, well, their patience." A soft laugh rippled through the room. "And I've been told we have a surprise guest here tonight. Someone who wasn't on the list because, well, we didn't think they'd make it." He looked right at me. I blinked. Then the doors opened behind me. A tall man in a navy coat walked in, carrying a folder. The crowd turned. The staff parted. Even Uncle stiffened. The man walked up to the mic, leaned in, and said, "My name is Emil Baumann. I'm the Director of International Relations at the University of Zurich. I've come here tonight on behalf of our youngest full scholarship researcher who recently filed an anonymous mortgage payoff in the name of the Fan family estate. Her work is currently under review for international publication." There was a silence. Then I stood up. Every head turned. I didn't mean to make an entrance. But suddenly, no one remembered I wasn't on the guest list. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible one in the room. If you've ever been through something like this, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. The silverware stilled. The air shifted. and everyone, even Uncle, went quiet. The clinking of forks and whispering behind hands had stopped. Even the waitstaff froze mid-step as Emil turned toward me and extended his hand, gesturing for me to come forward. My steps felt like thunder in my own ears. I could hear the sound of my heels on the tile, echoing like an accusation. As I approached the stage, I caught my uncle's eye, his smirk gone, his glass trembling slightly as he lowered it without taking a sip. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't need to. Emil had said enough. "Thank you," I said quietly, and turned to step down. But Anthony grabbed the mic again. "Wait, Lena, can you just say something like, 'What are you even doing in Switzerland? Last I heard, you were still tutoring kids at that after-school center.'" A few people chuckled, thinking it was a joke. I gave him a small smile. "I still tutor," I said simply. "But now I teach policy modeling and digital equity at the graduate level. Zurich offered me a 3-year grant to expand my work into low-income refugee communities. I didn't tell anyone." Anthony blinked. Someone coughed. I turned and walked back to Grandma, who hadn't moved an inch, as if she already knew everything that would happen. As I sat, she reached out and patted my hand. "You don't need to tell them more. Lena, they wouldn't understand even if you did." She was right. The rest of the night unfolded like I wasn't real. People approached, cautiously, politely. "Oh my God. Lena, I had no idea. You look so different. So professional. You speak German now too." They didn't know what to do with the version of me that didn't need anything from them. Aunt Mai came over with her 2 daughters, both dressed in nearly identical pink gowns. She tilted her head. "You paid off whose mortgage exactly?" she asked, like it was a math problem. I didn't specify names. I just covered the lien on the family house, so Grandma wouldn't have to worry about probate. I looked her in the eye. "It included your name too." She smiled stiffly and walked away. The rest of the night was a blur of hesitant compliments and second glances. At one point, I saw my mother across the room, sitting at the corner table with her arms crossed. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. I didn't expect her to approach me. She didn't. When the party ended, Grandma clung to my arm as we walked out. She was tired, but smiling. "They forget what they say to children," she whispered. "But children remember." We stood at the valet as the cold air swept through the marble entry. I wrapped my coat tighter around her shoulders. "You're not going back yet, are you?" she asked. "Not for another month. I rented a studio on the other side of the city. Quiet. No one knows I'm there." She nodded. "Come visit me tomorrow. Bring bread. Not the soft kind. The kind with crust." That was her way of saying she missed me, and I missed her too. The next day, I sat alone in my Airbnb kitchen, the smell of coffee thick and grounding. A stack of documents sat beside me, all needing signatures, new grants, new travel arrangements, a pending conference talk in Oslo. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I pulled out my phone and stared at a text thread that hadn't moved in months. Family chat. Last message was from Aunt Mai, who's bringing the rice cooker to the baby shower. I hovered over the reply button. Then I closed the app. Later that afternoon, I walked to Grandma's place with a bag of crusty rye bread and dried figs. Her apartment still smelled like medicated oils and old wood. She was sitting by the window, wrapped in a purple shawl, watching pigeons on the rooftop across the alley. "You showed them," she said, without looking at me. "No, I didn't." I replied. She turned. "They don't matter as much as you think. They just talk loud." We sat in silence. She tore the bread with her hands, dipped it into condensed milk, and offered me half. "You know," she said, When your father left, they laughed too, said he was foolish to follow a woman across the ocean. But who took care of me after he died? She looked at me. Not them. You. I didn't reply. I just ate the bread. Let the sweetness coat my mouth. Did it feel good? She asked. To see their faces when he said your name, I thought about it. It felt strange, like watching someone else's dream come true. She chuckled softly. Maybe it was my dream, not yours. That night, I walked through the old neighborhood, past the convenience store where I used to beg for ice cream money, past the library that stayed open late enough for me to pretend I was doing homework when I was just trying to avoid home. I passed 3 kids huddled around a cracked phone, speaking Vietnamese in fast, slang-heavy bursts. One of them looked up at me. Kola ai ve, who are you? I didn't answer, just smiled, just kept walking. Back at my studio, I finally opened the email from Emil. Subject: Zurich press interview pending approval. I clicked on the attached PDF. There was a paragraph about my work, my thesis, the impact of my digital equity model. But it ended with something unexpected. She does not speak of her past, but it's clear she carries it with a quiet gravity. She once told me that home is not where you are remembered, it's where you choose not to hide. I hadn't remembered saying that. Maybe I hadn't. I closed the laptop and stood at the window. The street below was quiet. It didn't matter whether it was Switzerland or San Jose. Quiet is the same everywhere. It's not about silence. It's about peace. And for the first time, I felt it. The next morning, I received a voicemail. Not a text. Not a comment on social media. A full voicemail. From my cousin Anthony. Hey Lena. So, that was... wow. I didn't know half of that. And I guess I'm calling because we're organizing a family dinner next week. Kind of a post-engagement thing. Not super formal. I told them you might not come, but I just thought you should know you're invited. I replayed it twice. His tone wavered between guilt and obligation, like someone rehearsing an apology they weren't ready to give. I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I caught a train to Daly City to visit a place I hadn't seen since high school. The hillside park where I used to sit during lunch and sketch diagrams of machines that didn't exist yet. No one had ever joined me there. I wasn't part of any group. I wasn't even on the yearbook committee when they voted on most likely to succeed. My name didn't come up once, but here, on this cracked bench half sunk into the soil, I'd built my own world with broken pens and cheap notebooks. I looked out over the bay. The fog was crawling low, softening the skyline into watercolor smudges. A man jogged past with his golden retriever. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing a Vietnamese ballad from a Bluetooth speaker. A sad one. It made me think of Dad. He never saw me leave the country. He died the year before I applied for the Zurich Fellowship. At his funeral, I remember standing behind the floral arrangements while the others made speeches, Aunt Mai reading a Bible verse she barely understood, Anthony cracking a joke to keep people from crying. No one asked if I wanted to speak. I didn't. But I remember whispering into the urn during the drive to the crematory. I'm going to do something big. You won't get to see it, but I'll carry you there. Back at the studio, I found a letter waiting at the door. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a photo of me, about 8 years old, sitting on a swing at a birthday party. My arms were folded. I looked like I'd just been told to smile and refused. Taped to the back was a note. You always saw things we didn't. Sorry we didn't see you. Mom. No greeting. No date. I sat down on the floor, still in my shoes, and stared at the photo for a long time. She must have gone through the old albums. She never apologized, not when I dropped out of pre-med. Not when I flew to Switzerland without telling anyone but Grandma. I hadn't even sent her a postcard. Still, I didn't cry. I just folded the photo, tucked it into my journal, and made tea. I finally answered Anthony's message the night before the dinner. "Sure, I'll come. I'll bring dessert." He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a location pin for a family-style Korean BBQ place in the East Bay. I showed up 15 minutes early. The hostess looked up from the list. "Fan party." "Yes." She smiled. "They said to seat you when you arrived. This way." She led me to a long table already set with banchan kimchi, pickled radish, shredded fish cake, seaweed salad. I sat down at the end and placed the dessert box gently in front of me. It was a simple one-matcha cheesecake I made myself, topped with black sesame dust and edible violets. I watched as the family trickled in, one by one. Anthony came first, with his fiancée. She waved awkwardly. "Lena, hi, you look nice." Aunt Mai followed, wearing a scarf in the same pattern as Grandma's old curtains. "Oh wow, is that homemade?" "Looks expensive." Uncle said nothing, just took his seat and avoided my eyes. And then my mother came in. She wore a jade pendant I hadn't seen since I was a child. It used to hang above her sewing machine, swaying softly every time she pressed the foot pedal. She sat beside me, didn't say anything, but her hand brushed mine when she reached for a napkin. The meal began the way all fan dinners did, too loud, overlapping stories, someone always chewing with their mouth open. I mostly listened. I smiled. I passed plates. But then Anthony raised a glass. "To Lena," he said, "for being smarter than all of us combined, and for not letting us pull her down when we didn't know any better." It was awkward, and kind, and poorly worded, but real. I raised my own glass, to not holding grudges, just receipts. They laughed. Even Uncle cracked a grin. Later, while slicing the cake, my mother leaned in and said quietly, "Your father would have said it was too sweet, but he would have eaten 2 slices anyway." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. Back at the studio, I lay on the couch with the window open, listening to a language I once hated echo in the alley, the sing-song of a neighbor's Vietnamese phone call. One phrase repeating again and again, "No ja joy kach roy." She's different now. Maybe. The next morning, I booked my flight back to Switzerland. Round trip. I had 1 more week here, and I planned to spend most of it in silence. No more events, no more staged invitations. Just me and Grandma. I visited her the next day with fresh roses and soft bread this time because she'd said crust, but I knew her teeth couldn't handle it anymore. She opened the door and pulled me into a hug. "You're still skinny. They must not feed you in Europe. They feed me fine," I said. "I just don't eat much when I'm working." She motioned to the couch. "Sit. I have something for you." She handed me a wrapped bundle old paper, twine, a faded sticker from an electronics shop that closed down years ago. Inside were blueprints. Mine, the ones I used to draw in high school, all kept in a folder she had hidden away, labeled, organized, pressed flat like they mattered. I didn't understand them. She said, "Still don't." But I knew they were important. I touched the paper. My handwriting looked younger, rounder. One sketch was labeled Solar Smart Board for Kids Without Classrooms. That prototype had become my Zurich project. "You remembered this?" "I remember everything you don't say," she said, "because that's where the truth lives." We sat together for hours, not speaking. She dozed off mid-sentence, her hand still clutching my wrist, and I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before all this time. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong. I was trying to find the one person who always saw me, and she'd never stopped. I spent the next few days living in quiet moments, morning walks through the neighborhood where every tree felt shorter, every street tighter than I remembered. The corner store still had the same faded lottery sign. The man behind the register still wore a Bluetooth headset he never actually used. I bought a bottle of soy milk and a bag of shrimp chips and sat on the curb, just like I used to in middle school when I was too afraid to go home. Back then, I'd pretend to be doing homework under the streetlight. In reality, I just watched the world pass me by, convinced it had no space for me in it. Now, a kid rolled by on a skateboard, earbuds in, hoodie up. He glanced at me for a split second, then disappeared into the dusk. That's what I was once, a blur no one noticed. A background character in my own family. And in some ways, I still was. They knew me now. Sure, but they didn't know me. I didn't want their applause. I wanted something else. I didn't know what. That same night, I got another message, this time from my brother. Kai, 9:03 p.m. You still in town? Ma wants to know if you'll come by Sunday. Family's doing hot pot. Lena, 9:06 p.m. Will you be there? Kai, 9:07 p.m. If you are. It was enough. We hadn't had a full conversation in years. Growing up, we were inseparable. He taught me how to hack our middle school's attendance system so I could skip P.E. He built me a fake university acceptance letter when I cried after my first rejection. But after Dad died, he shut off. I tried to talk to him. He told me I was too intense, that I needed to chill. And when I left for Zurich, he didn't even say goodbye. Sunday came quietly. I brought fruit, longuns, rambutans, and purple grapes still glistening with morning dew. I wore a plain gray sweater and jeans. No makeup, no layers to explain. The moment I stepped into my mother's house, it was like stepping into humidity, the heat of voices, the scent of lemongrass broth and stewed beef, the clatter of metal chopsticks hitting ceramic bowls. I stood at the threshold for a moment before Grandma spotted me and called out, "Conbe toi roi kia." She's here. Everyone turned, mid-laugh, mid-bite. For a moment, silence. Then my cousin Vin broke it with a mouthful of fishball. Yo, Lena brought snacks. The room exhaled. I smiled. Kai walked over and took the bag from me. You still can't cook, I can. I said, but not for people who ask like that. He laughed. And that laugh was real. We sat around the hot pot like nothing had changed me. Kai, Uncle with his endless opinions. Aunt Mai making passive comments about her digestion. Anthony with his fiancé politely serving bowls to everyone but me. Even Mom seemed settled. She didn't say much, just scooped broth into my bowl and pushed the mushrooms toward me the way she used to when I was too skinny in high school. Kai leaned toward me during the meal and whispered, "She's been bragging about you. Quietly, to the neighbors, calls you Tien Si Ben Tui Si. Doctor from Switzerland." I shook my head. I'm not a doctor. He grinned. She doesn't care. It just sounds impressive. After dinner, I found myself in my old bedroom, still dusty, still painted that washed-out lavender I begged for in middle school. The posters were gone, but the shadow outlines still clung to the walls like ghosts. I opened the closet. Inside were boxes marked, "Lena, don't throw." I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the top one. Notebooks, pages of sketches, old cassette recordings labeled with Sharpie thesis notes. Age 16. Newspaper clippings of competitions I never won. A photo of me holding a participation trophy with a fake smile. Mom stood quietly in the doorway. "You left those behind," she said. But I didn't. I looked up. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because I knew you'd come back. Not to stay, but just to see." She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded like a question she was scared to ask. "I didn't know how to raise a girl like you," she whispered. I waited. "You were always somewhere else, in your head. Too quiet, too strange. Your father understood. I didn't. I thought if I made you more like the others, you'd be safe." I didn't answer. There was nothing to forgive, but everything to feel. She reached into her pocket and handed me something, my father's old calculator watch. The one with the missing button. The one he used to tap like a nervous habit whenever bills piled up. He would have wanted you to have it. I held it in my palm. It felt smaller than I remembered. That night, I walked the empty hallway of my building in the city, the lights flickering faintly, the carpet stained in corners with coffee or age. I passed a mirror at the stairwell landing and saw myself. Just for a second, a blur of long hair, tired eyes, a sweater wrinkled from sitting too long, and I thought, I look like someone who's trying not to leave again. The next day, I boarded the tram to the university campus to meet with a journalist who had requested an interview. Word had gotten out after Emil's speech. They wanted to know how it felt to return home as a success story. I didn't know how to answer that, but I showed up. The journalist, a woman in her 40s with sharp bangs and too much eyeliner, smiled as she pressed record. "So, Lena, when you were younger, did you ever imagine you'd end up here?" "No," I said. Not because I didn't believe I could, but because no one around me believed at first. She blinked. I continued. "But I'm not here because I proved anyone wrong. I'm here because someone believed in me when it wasn't fashionable. My grandmother, a school librarian, a tutor who gave me extra batteries for my calculator when I couldn't afford them. That's who brought me here." She leaned in. "And what would you say to the people who doubted you?" I smiled. "Nothing. They've already said enough." That evening, I walked to the post office and mailed one envelope each to 3 separate addresses. Inside each was a simple sheet of paper, mortgage release notice, account settled in full, no signature. No note, just the facts. They'd know who it was from. I didn't want to thank you. I didn't need applause. I just needed to know I could leave and still be whole. The next morning, I flew back to Zurich. And this time, I didn't look back at the boarding gate. Not even once. Zurich greeted me with silence. Not the kind of silence you find at 3 in a bedroom you once shared, nor the type that creeps in after a fight no one wants to finish. No. This was a clean silence, crisp, alpine, effortless. The kind that made you breathe slower, made you listen deeper. I stepped out of the airport shuttle and into the early evening chill, dragging my suitcase over cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of strangers. The lake glimmered in the distance, lit by the faint reflection of stars not yet visible. The air smelled like pine and precision. Back in my flat, the radiator hummed softly. I set my bags down and opened the window. A man on a bicycle passed below, his scarf trailing like a story. Across the street, an elderly woman was watering her winter geraniums. Life here moved quietly, like it didn't need an audience. I unpacked slowly, one item at a time. Sweater, scarf, watch. I held my father's calculator watch in my palm and stared at the missing button. I pressed it anyway. It made no sound. Still, I set it on my desk next to my stack of thesis drafts like he belonged there, like he'd always been part of this. The next morning, I walked into the university with my ID badge clipped to a lanyard that still smelled faintly of ink and tea. Students milled around the main hall. Someone waved. Another nodded. No one whispered. No one laughed. This place had never doubted me, because it never had to unlearn the habit of underestimating me in the first place. Emil found me by the vending machines. "You're back," he said, handing me a coffee without asking. I'm back. Family still alive. Too alive. He laughed. We walked to the lecture hall. My name was on the sign outside DR. Lena Fan Guest Lecture. Room 204. Technically, I wasn't a doctor, but Emil said it was aspirational. Inside, the students were already seated early, eager. I set my notes down and paused before speaking. Then I began. Not with numbers, not with code, but with a story. When I was 8, I said, I built my first signal amplifier out of an old Walkman and a cracked mirror. I told everyone it could pick up voices from satellites. It didn't. It barely worked. But for the first time, people listened. Not because it was real, but because I acted like it was. A few students chuckled. I come from a place where silence was expected, where being loud meant being disrespectful, and being too smart meant being alone. Zurich didn't change me. It just gave me permission to stop hiding. They looked at me, not past me, not through me, at me. After the lecture, a girl approached. Pale skin, nervous hands. She spoke softly. I'm the first in my family to study abroad, she said. My aunt says I'll forget who I am, that I'll come back full of arrogance. I paused. Tell her you'll come back full of stories, and that she's welcome to listen when she's ready. She smiled. May I email you? Yes, I said. Please. In the weeks that followed, life fell back into rhythm. Mornings spent refining models, afternoons translating research for refugee community projects, evenings curled up with books I once couldn't afford, now marked with sticky notes in 4 different languages. I started writing letters I never sent. To my father, you'd like it here. The trains run on time, and the people only speak when they mean it. To my mother, I understand now. You weren't cold. You were scared. And your silence was your armor. To Kai, you're still my big brother, even when you disappear. Especially then. To myself, you didn't need to be loud to be heard. You just needed to keep speaking. One evening, I received a package from California. No note. Just a photo frame and a flash drive. The frame held an old photo me in 3rd grade, holding a certificate of participation for a spelling bee I lost. I was scowling. Grandma stood behind me, clapping anyway. The flash drive contained a video. It was a recording of the engagement party. But not from the official videographer, from someone's phone. Off to the side. Shaky, blurry, but unmistakable. There I was, at the back of the room, helping Grandma stand, and there, right at the moment Emil announced my name, was the shift. Uncle's face dropped. Aunt Mai's mouth parted. Anthony's fiancé blinked like a rewound tape. But more than that, I saw me. Not small, not shy, not out of place. Just standing still in a room that had finally paused long enough to notice me. I watched it 3 times. Then I deleted it. I didn't need to prove it anymore. Not to them. Not to anyone. On the first snowy morning of December, I walked to the corner bakery and bought a loaf of rye and 2 buttered croissants. I took one to the small park near the campus, sat on a wooden bench, and watched as pigeons fought over crumbs with the same intensity as relatives over old grudges. A little boy ran past me chasing his glove. He laughed so hard he couldn't catch it. His mother called out in French, but he kept laughing. I smiled, took a bite of my croissant, checked my phone. 1 new message. From Kai. Kai, 7:44 a.m. PST. Heard Mom framed your certificate. Not the PhD one. The old spelling bee. Lena, 5:46 p.m. seat. Of course she did. Kai, 7:45 a.m. PST. Grandma says you're speaking at that UNU thing, Lena, by 5:47 p.m. set. Yeah. Next month? Kai, 7:47 a.m. PST. Don't forget to say where you came from, even if they didn't always say your name. I stared at that for a while. Then I typed Lena, 5:49 p.m. set. I never forgot, even when they did. That night, I poured tea into the chipped ceramic mug Grandma once sent me, the one with a faded fish painted on the side. I lit a candle and turned off every other light. The silence returned, not empty, just full of the things I never said out loud, that I had once been the afterthought at every table, that I had written my college application essays in secret because no one thought I was worth the fee, that I had memorized the rhythm of other people's expectations before I learned the sound of my own voice, that I left not to escape, but to survive, and that I had come back not for revenge, but for release. They laughed when I said I'd study abroad. Now, I sit in a city older than their judgments, paid off the mortgages they fought over in whispers, and built a life no one would have imagined for me. But I imagined it. And sometimes, that's enough. The day before my UN Youth Summit speech, I found myself standing in front of a full-length mirror inside a borrowed office, hidden behind a panel of frosted glass. I adjusted the collar of my navy blouse and smoothed the hem of my wool skirt. Nothing flashy, nothing bold. Just neat. Just intentional. The badge around my neck read, Lena Fan Digital Equity and Inclusion Advisor, Zurich Chapter. But titles never meant as much to me as the weight of silence I carried into every room. Outside the building, the snow was beginning to fall again, thick, unhurried flakes tumbling like forgotten pages. I opened the window slightly. The cold slapped my face and cleared the fog of nerves clinging to my skin. Inside, I could already hear the murmur of young voices in multiple languages: Swahili, French, Hindi, German. Students and delegates and activists all gathered beneath one roof, waiting to listen, to speak, to be seen. I looked down at my notes. I had written everything I thought I needed to say, but I didn't feel it. Not yet. So I opened my email instead, and there it was. A new message. Subject: Grandma from Kai time, 03:27 a.m. PST. She fainted yesterday. Probably stress. She's fine now. Said not to bother you before your speech. She's just being stubborn again. But when she woke up, she asked for that tea you used to bring from Zurich. The one with the little flowers. Also, she kept mumbling something weird. Something like, "Tell her we see her now. Just figured you should know. That's all." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I closed the laptop gently and stared at the wall until the clock ticked past the hour. Then I stood, exhaled, and walked toward the sound of waiting applause. The auditorium was grand, but soft, velvet seating, warm lights, 1,000 eyes blinking up from the darkness. I stepped to the podium. No spotlight, no booming intro music, just me and a quiet microphone. "Good evening," I began. A pause. "My name is Lena Fan. I work with displaced communities across Europe, people who have no address, no identity on paper, no documented path forward. But I'm not here tonight to speak about the people I work for. I'm here to talk about the people I come from." The room hushed. I was raised in a house where praise was folded into food, where love was rarely spoken, but always given in rice bowls and peeled fruit. I was told to stay quiet, to work hard, and to remember that being too proud was the fastest way to bring shame to the family name. Scattered nods in the crowd. I believed, for a long time, that humility meant hiding, that success only counted if you kept it secret, that silence was safer than standing tall. I shifted slightly, my hands resting on the podium like anchors. I was wrong, a ripple in the room. Because I've learned that visibility is not arrogance, that claiming space isn't selfish, that sometimes the most generous thing you can do for the people you love is to become the version of yourself they never had the chance to imagine. I saw faces change, saw young people sit up straighter. I paid off my family's debts from across an ocean. I worked in silence. I endured being forgotten. And when they remembered me again, I chose not to punish them, but to remind them that I had always been there, even when they looked the other way. Applause now. But I held up a hand to stop it. I'm not telling you this to be admired. I'm telling you this because someone out there is wondering if they need to stay small to stay loved. You don't. Then I stepped back. No big finish, just truth. As I walked off stage, someone reached out and touched my arm. You made me cry, she whispered. I didn't know we were allowed to say those things. I smiled. We are now. The next morning, I packed up a small box of gifts, local teas, herbal candies, dried violets. I labeled the box to Grandma, with love from the cold. Then I walked it to the post office, filled out the form, and handed it off. It would take 10 days to reach San Jose. I didn't mind the wait. She always said things tasted better after they'd been patient. I returned to the flat, dropped my coat, and let the silence fill every corner. I poured a cup of hot water and let it steep without checking the time. Then I pulled out a photo album I hadn't opened in years. Inside were faces I thought I'd forgotten. Young me in pigtails. Dad holding me upside down near a beach. Kai holding up a birthday cake with half the candles blown out. In the back pocket of the album, I found a folded receipt, dated 5 years ago. A bus ticket from Zurich to Geneva. I had taken that ride during my first winter in Europe, crying quietly in the back seat after getting rejected from my 3rd grant application. I kept the ticket. I remembered thinking, this is what failure feels like in another language. Now, it felt like a badge. I placed the receipt next to the photo of Grandma and closed the book. 2 weeks later, I received a voicemail. It was her. Grandma. Con-ah. The tea is strong. I like it. You always remember. Everyone asks why I smile these days. I tell them, because I have a granddaughter who speaks in front of the world, but still sends dried plums to an old lady with no teeth. She laughed. And then, softer. They see you now. But I always did. I saved the voicemail. Played it twice, then once more with my eyes closed. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner for the team, just 6 of us students, translators, researchers, people who didn't care about prestige, just the work. We sat on the floor of my apartment, eating sticky rice and tofu wrapped in banana leaves I'd carried back from the Asian grocer across the river. Someone put on music. Someone spilled soup. We laughed like family, but without any of the wounds. And for a moment, I forgot I had ever wanted anything else. After they left, I cleaned in silence, at the bottom of a dish. I found a slice of lime. I held it up to the light. It reminded me of summer, of home, of the way my father used to squeeze citrus onto everything, even soup. He said it woke up the flavor. I smiled and licked the juice from my finger. It stung a little, but it tasted right. Later that night, I wrote one last letter, not to anyone else, just to myself. You made it, not because you were better, not because you proved them wrong, but because you kept going, even when no one clapped. You paid off their houses, not out of revenge, but because you refused to inherit their bitterness. You stayed soft. You stayed stubborn. And in a world that tried to shape you into silence, you chose to build your voice, brick by quiet brick. That is your home now, and it cannot be taken. I folded the paper and slid it under the watch on my desk. The snow kept falling outside, soft, certain. And I didn't feel far away anymore, just right where I was meant to be. 3 days before my 27th birthday, I took the train to Lausanne for a weekend retreat. Not for work, not for a conference, Not even for a lecture, I just needed to disappear for a moment in a place where no one knew my name. The lake near Lausanne was different from the one in Zurich. Wilder. Grittier. The wind moved faster here, whipping through your coat like it had something to say. I rented a small room inside an old vineyard-turned hostel, its walls still heavy with the smell of oak and old wine. The woman at reception gave me a room key and a smile that said, "You look tired, but you'll be fine." She was right. I didn't bring a laptop. Just a notebook. Just my father's watch. Just a scarf my grandmother knitted years ago with yarn that unraveled if you pulled too hard. That first night, I walked barefoot across the chilled wooden floor of my room and sat on the windowsill. The mountains rose like teeth in the dark. I couldn't see the lake, but I could hear it lashing softly, like someone whispering secrets in another room. I stayed like that for hours, not thinking, just remembering. On the morning of my birthday, I woke to a single message. Grandma, 14 a.m. PST, happy birthday. Child, don't let your tea get cold. Also, tell that brother of yours to call me more. I laughed. Then I cried. Not the dramatic kind, not the lonely kind, just the kind where you let go without apology. I made tea. Jasmine this time. The kind she used to hide in rice jars to keep it dry. Then I opened my notebook and began to write, not for work, not for approval, just to speak. You don't owe the world your silence. You don't owe your family your obedience if it breaks your spirit. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself they prefer. What you owe is to grow anyway, in noise, in distance, in the soft rebellion of not shrinking. I closed the notebook and held it against my chest like a warmth I didn't know I needed. That afternoon, I joined a vineyard tour. The guide, a French-speaking man with soil-stained boots and a sun-creased smile, asked each of us to introduce ourselves. There were 8 of us, a couple from Norway, a painter from New York, a silent man with a camera, and me. When it was my turn, I simply said, Lena. No title, no story. No one asked for more. We walked between rows of dormant vines, their twisted branches reaching skyward like dancers caught mid-pose. The guide explained how they must be pruned in winter, how cutting them back was an act of trust. They look dead now, he said, but without the cut, they grow wild and fruitless. I stopped and stared at the vines. So much of me had been cut, words swallowed, dreams deferred, years spent invisible. But maybe that pruning had purpose. Maybe the point wasn't to bloom all the time, but to wait to gather something deeper. That evening, back in my room, I received an email from the Zurich Fellowship Committee. Congratulations. Your project has been approved for long-term extension. You've also been nominated for the Europa Rising Voice Grant. We'll need your bio. I stared at the screen. Then I closed it. Not because I wasn't proud, but because that wasn't the moment I wanted to remember. Instead, I opened a letter I'd been keeping for weeks, unread, unopened, sealed in its original envelope. From Mom. She had handed it to me the day I flew back to Zurich. Read it when you miss something, she'd said. I tore the flap slowly. Inside was a single page. Lena. I don't know how to say these things out loud. I wasn't raised that way. I used to think strength meant control, silence, survival. But I see now that it can also look like you traveling alone, risking everything, staying soft in a world that hardened me. I didn't know how to raise you, but I'm still learning how to love you the way you deserve. I'm sorry, and I'm proud. Mom, the paper trembled in my hands. I placed it next to my father's watch. Then I took out my phone. Lena, 9:02 p.m. set. Tell Grandma I got her message, tell her my tea was warm, and tell Mom I read the letter. Thank you. Kai, 12:03 p.m. PST. She cried. But in that grandma way where she pretends it's just eye drops. Mom wants to know if you're coming home for New Year. I stared at the blinking cursor. Then I typed Lena, 9:06 p.m. set. Not this one, but maybe the next. I left Lausanne the next morning before sunrise. The train windows fogged with breath and condensation, erasing the outside world for a while. I leaned my head against the glass, watched my own reflection flicker between darkness and light as we passed through tunnels. And somewhere near Lucerne, I whispered to the version of myself I used to be. You did it. You weren't loud, but they heard you anyway. Back in Zurich, I returned to the life I had built from silence, classes, students, code. But something was different now. One by one, letters began arriving at my office. Handwritten ones. From girls in Bolivia. From students in Uganda. From a single mother in Croatia who had watched my summit speech on a borrowed phone. They all said the same thing in different words. I didn't know I was allowed to exist like this. I kept every letter, pinned them to the wall above my desk, not as trophies, but as proof that stories don't have to be shouted to echo. Weeks passed. I walked home late one evening, the wind biting through my coat, snowflakes dancing in the streetlights, and then I stopped. There, in the bookstore window across from my flat, was something I hadn't expected. A display titled, Voices from Elsewhere, and among the books was mine. My research. Yes, but also the stories. The blueprint. The soft rebellion that had carried me from silence to Switzerland. I walked inside, pulled a copy off the shelf, and opened to the dedication for the ones they laughed at, for the ones they left off the list, for the ones who paid the price in quiet. We see you. You were never invisible. I didn't buy it. I just smiled, stepped back into the snow, and let the cold kiss my face like an old friend. The Zurich sun was pale and sharp the morning I received the final call. It came not from Kai, not from Mom, but from a number I didn't recognize. Swiss country code. Local digits. Hello, I answered. There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. At least not like this. Lena, Anthony said. It's me. The sound of his voice felt like walking through a childhood hallway and finding the wallpaper unchanged. I know it's you, I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. I didn't want to bother you, but I've been thinking. I waited. He exhaled. I keep telling people you're my cousin, he said. That you live in Switzerland now. That you spoke at the UN. But the truth is, I didn't really know anything about your work until last week. I watched the summit speech. Twice. I said nothing. And his voice faltered. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry, not just for the party, for all of it, for laughing, for assuming you'd fail, for not even seeing you. Silence. I don't expect a response, he continued. But Mom says you'll be back next spring, for Grandma's birthday. I paused, then said, if she still likes crusty bread? He chuckled quietly, relieved. She'll eat it even if it breaks her teeth. She says it's worth the trouble. I smiled. She's always been like that. I hope we can talk then, for real. Maybe we will, I said. He didn't push, just said, okay, thanks, Lena, for everything. And then he was gone. The rest of that day passed like water clean, unnoticed, and somehow healing. I taught a workshop that afternoon. My students were sharp, distracted, curious, exactly how I liked them. They asked difficult questions, not because they doubted me, but because they believed I could answer. After class, a girl named Noor followed me out of the lecture hall. Professor Fan, she said, hesitating. Do you ever think about going back to the place where no one believed you? I adjusted my scarf and thought carefully. Sometimes, I said, but not because I want their approval, because I want to see it differently, on my own terms. She nodded. That makes sense. Then, softly, thank you. Not for the lecture, for the honesty. That night, I wandered through the old quarter of the city. Snow was melting on the rooftops, creating little streams that ran between the cobblestones. I stopped by the bridge where artists sometimes sold watercolors and trinkets. One vendor caught my eye, a middle-aged woman with deep lines around her mouth and a tiny collection of silver lockets. I picked one up. Inside was a scrap of paper, hand-cut, barely visible. It read, "You were never hard to love. They just couldn't see clearly." I bought it without asking the price. Back at home, I slipped the locket into my desk drawer, next to the watch and the letter and the old notebook I still hadn't fully read through. It didn't matter if I ever wore it. It was enough to know it existed. Weeks later, I found myself at the Zurich train station again, this time not to leave, but to meet someone arriving. The international platform was crowded, the air thick with jet fuel and anticipation. I stood near the arrivals board, holding a paper bag of pastries and a folded scarf. A small girl ran past, dragging a suitcase covered in stickers. Then I saw her, my mother. She wore a padded jacket too large for her, a travel pillow still looped around her neck like an afterthought. Her eyes searched the crowd, uncertain. I raised a hand. She found me, and she didn't cry, didn't run, just walked slowly until we stood face to face. "You came," I said. "You asked." I handed her the scarf. She took it. No questions. We didn't hug. Not yet. But we stood there for a long time, letting the crowd move around us like a river split by a rock. The next few days were soft, strange, beautiful. I showed her the lake, the university, the bakery that knew my name. She walked slower than I remembered, slept more, asked quiet questions. "Do they know you here?" she asked one morning. "They know my work," I replied. "And do they respect it? They don't question if I deserve to be in the room." She nodded slowly. Later that afternoon, we sat in my flat, sipping soup I had made too salty. She didn't complain. "You know," she said suddenly, "when you were little, I didn't understand you. You weren't like the others. You asked too many questions. You didn't want to do what everyone else did. I still don't." She smiled faintly. "That used to scare me. Now I think it saved you." I looked at her then, not as the mother who used to scold me for reading too much, or the woman who once forgot my high school award night, but as someone who had lived through her own pruning season and survived it. "Maybe it saved both of us," I said. The day she left, she tucked a small red envelope into my hand at the station. "Don't open it until Tet," she said. "And don't lose it." I folded it 3 times for good luck. I nodded. "Tell Kai I'll message him. He already knows," she said. "He watches your interviews. You know. He doesn't say much. He doesn't have to. He listens." She turned, walked toward the gate, then paused. "You're not hard to love, Lena," she said. "You were just hard to reach." Then she boarded, and I stood there with the envelope in my hand, feeling the pulse of something I hadn't known I needed. Spring came in slow waves. The trees outside the university bloomed with sharp white blossoms. The snow melted fully. My students wore less black. The sun stayed up later and made everything look less afraid. On the first day of Tet, I opened the envelope. Inside was money. Yes, but also a note. "Spend it on something that makes you laugh. Not something responsible. Not something useful. Just joy." I bought a kite. I took it to the lake and flew it alone until my arms ached. And I laughed loud, sharp, breathless. People stared, but I didn't stop. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I was just being. The final letter I wrote was not addressed to anyone. I left it on my desk before flying home that summer, folded neatly under my father's watch. You don't need applause to matter. You don't need a spotlight to shine. You don't need permission to heal. You survived the laughter. You stayed soft in the echo. And you returned, not to prove anything, but to remind them who you've always been.